The Paratus Intervention, a novella by Jeremiah D. McRoberts, read for you by the author. Chapter 1. Lawrence Larry James looked out over the city from the top of the Paratus building. Whenever he was flying above the skyline, he was too busy scanning for enemies and hazards that were never likely to be there to fully appreciate the view. His perspective was ever limited by his training, that relentless tyrant in his own mind. Besides, it was mostly just tops of buildings, small or smaller squares depending on how much sky its designers had dared to scrape. The roof of the New York headquarters of the Paratus Group, however, provided the perfect perspective as far as Larry was concerned. His helo's propeller blades slowing to a stop, he looked out on the city. Neither the highest nor the lowest of the buildings, but within their midst. Too high to see the streets below, but not so high that the dozens of unique towers of human accomplishment all around him could not be appreciated for the marvels that they were. Once the blades were merely ambling in the ambient wind, Larry secured them, entering his key code into the door at the edge of the helipad, and descended the stairs. Passing a clerk with an armful of file folders, and getting the now familiar, "You know we all hate you, Larry," he made his way the 50 or so feet to the elevator and rode it down into the belly of the beast. Due to the fact that he was the only employee who utilized the helipad, Larry's office was efficiently located next to the central elevator bank. His door, Lawrence J. James, Intervention Technician, printed upon it, was open to a small, austere lobby containing one couch, 4 chairs, a receptionist window, with one other door next to it, and today, someone seated and waiting. The person, a man in a classic black suit and tie, stood, and the head of auburn hair in the window spun around to reveal the youthful, bespectacled face of a woman. In an only slightly nasal voice, she introduced them. "Mr. James, this is Mr. Smith. The director made his appointment personally." Larry extended his hand. "Then I doubly hope you haven't been waiting long." Mr. Smith took it and shook, almost firm, and replied, "Not at all. Had just sat down, actually. As I hear, it's not like you were stuck in traffic. No doubt you got here sooner than anyone else could have." "Still," Larry admitted, releasing hands, "if I had known." "Not my fault," Katie chimed in. Mr. Smith laughed slightly. "Not at all," asking, "Can you see me now?" "Sure thing," Larry agreed. "Katie, please buzz us through." The door next to the receptionist window pushed open freely as the two men went through, and Katie held down the maglock release. There was only the faintest audible hum as the circuit that normally held the door closed temporarily fed back onto itself, releasing the door. But buzzing was just what it had come to be called. Passing the reception desk, Larry and Katie exchanging smiles, something coy in each, the two men entered into Larry's spacious office, finely appointed in an oak, silver, and crystal motif. There was a sky view on one wall, although these windows framed nothing like that seen from the roof. Yet Mr. Smith appreciated it for just a couple seconds, right as he sat, and as he did so, shared. "I knew the director when he was still called CEO, and this was Paratus Insurance Limited." Mr. Smith landed his posterior on the chocolate leather couch, to find it unexpectedly firm. Larry stood across the glass coffee table from him, and before sitting in one of the 2 matching leather armchairs, offered, "We still do sell insurance, Mr. Smith. If you have some upcoming high-risk endeavor you want some coverage for, but I'm not the guy to see about that." Mr. Smith smiled falsely, his eyes as unyielding as the couch beneath his ass, as he agreed, No, you're not. I've got a guy 10 floors down to handle the unnecessary risks born of my opulence." With that, Larry sat, left arm on its rest, right hand in his lap, and asked the literally million-dollar question. "So what can we do for you today?" "I've yet to experience intervention," Mr. Smith began. "Read all about 'em, of course, just like everyone else, and then some. But if you don't mind, could you give me your own take?" Larry looked out the window. something wistful or longing falling upon and then fading from his countenance before he looked back to Mr. Smith to reply. I'm not a salesman, and I don't write copy for the ads. I'm a technician. If you believe the guys upstairs, the director, and whoever else pushed to make my own helicopter and helipad a perk here, I'm the best technician. Best that they've got, anyway. You've decided that you want intervention? You've got hands on the right amount of strings or dollars? You get me. I'm the guy. You don't know what you want yet, Mr. Smith? I'm sorry, but that's just not my department. Larry clenched his jaw in anticipation of what was coming next. Intervention was a new field for everyone, but he had met other Misters Smith in unremarkable black suits with friends in high places before. Some things never change. He was not going to like this. You don't work on commission, Mr. James, the Mr. Smith reminded him unnecessarily. And this isn't a private practice, not for you. You are a technician, as you say, an employee with salary and benefits and perks. I'm your employer's customer, and he has sold me your time. He's prepared to sell me quite a bit more of it as needed. So why don't we go back to playing business casual? I had asked a simple enough question, one that a man in your position, with your first-hand experience, should be able to answer readily. Could you give me your take on intervention? Actually, Larry James replied, you asked me if I didn't mind, too, but I do mind, and I think you know that. My take on intervention is that it's something that I'm not terribly fond of, but am extremely good at. The irony is not lost on me. My take on intervention? A man can't stop the tide. People want it, and so people will get it. If not from me, then from someone else. So I do it. I do it because it's going to be done, and nothing else that I can do will provide me a life half as good as this one. I tell myself that because I'm the best, there's some upside for the patient too. But it's so error-resistant to begin with that I can't really make that rationalization into any kind of justification with weight. I also tell myself that because it's voluntary, that because it's always 100% voluntary, I'm not doing anything to anyone that they don't want done. If someone else sells them on the idea or twists their arm, gives them a crap alternative, that's not on me. Everyone that has ever received intervention from me agreed to it for their own reasons that are, frankly, none of mine. And yet, it isn't really so simple, the Mr. Smith amended, or else you wouldn't resist and resent discussion of the topic so much. A man otherwise so strictly rational, notoriously so, and yet here he is, flush, flustered, and rattled. Larry chuckled, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter of brown liquid on the table between them, and substituted quote for comment. The lady doth protest too much, methinks. If you really, truly believe that intervention is that error-proof, the Mr. Smith asked, eyeing the brimful tumbler, then why the strong opinion? Why the resistance? Why haven't you experienced it for yourself either? Larry took a long drink. This was not a man that Larry wanted to drink with. He had not offered him a drink. These things had not even crossed Larry's mind. He was accustomed to certain stressors, and that was fine. They were fine. Yet there were other things he had conditioned himself not to think about, and their stress was unfamiliar, uncomfortable. When Larry was stressed and uncomfortable, he drank. He did not think about it. He just did it. Swallowing, Larry answered, It's not the process or the efficacy. It is what intervention in itself is. We change what, how, and why people think what they think by causing them to forget. Forget significant and novel things, memories, opinions, concepts, curiosities, peeves and preferences, habits and inhibitions. They just go away. Poof. If the proper origins and motivations can be rooted out, and that's what I'm so effing good at, then they stay gone. Forever. Without intervention, just as a man, I can teach myself to stop indulging in some strange fascination. I can teach myself to let go of insecurities and be more confident in preparation for some moment. We can condition ourselves out of mediocrity and into greatness, or we can try and fail. or we cannot be bothered to try at all. And all of that says something monumentally important about who we are as individuals. Can you summon up the wherewithal to be what is needed when the time comes? Most of us can't, Larry, the Mr. Smith replied. You have, I have, sometimes. We fail sometimes, too. You haven't asked that pretty divorcee out there for a date yet, and she clearly likes you. You are drinking with a guy you don't like just because you needed a drink. You have alcohol at work, where you fly a helicopter, for God's sake, just in case you need it. Those are nothing, Larry. Those are fine. You can fail but manage at the peripheral tasks in your life all you like, and society just goes right on fine and appreciates whatever contribution you can muster. But we've got real problems for which intervention has been the best solution. Psychopaths, addicts, pedophiles, all effectively eliminated from society. If not fixed, managed more efficiently, more effectively. Better for them and better for us than pharmaceutical regimens, psychotherapy, prisons, or psych wards could ever come close to. Larry gritted his teeth, glass tumbling in hand, as he forced himself to speak. You think I don't know all of this? Just seemed like your point deserved a counterpoint, the Mr. Smith explained. Setting the tumbler on the table, Larry walked to his desk and hit the intercom. Katie, could you please invite Anne to join us? Tell her that I'm with a priority client from the director. Sure thing, Mr. James, Katie chirped in reply. Turning back to his client, Larry asked, Fine. You want to debate the merits of intervention? You win. Those are my reservations with it. Not the what or the how, but the why, the should we. They are of speculative philosophy, something to be mulled over, something completely skipped in the ethical considerations of implementing intervention. The quantifiable, significant, and immediate benefits outweighed any potential risks, let alone existential questions that no one had time for, long before you had ever heard of intervention. You won the debate before you ever opened your mouth. You asked for my take. That is my take. So, Smith, I ask you, what can I do for you today? The people I work for have developed a new means of applying intervention, the Mr. Smith answered. We are considering contracting the Paratus Group to oversee and execute this intervention. The director said that if I can convince you, he'd take the job. You would still work with some clients directly, a small number, families and companies that you've worked with before, others that might insist on you and your reputation. But he wants to promote you to vice assistant director in charge of this new contract. He said he wouldn't risk the group's existing clientele and reputation on this, unless Lawrence J. James was in charge of it. But that it wasn't going to be a promotion that you'd agree to lightly. Frankly, my employers are just as enamored with your technical skills and will just as likely give the contract to someone else if you aren't involved. Larry heard the man's words, understood the surface value of the semantics that connected one idea to the next. But there was a lot to take in, so he stood silent for what seemed like a long time, although actually less than a minute, considering them. Convince me. Clearly some personal or ethical boundary was about to be challenged. Promotion to vice assistant director in charge of a project. Genuinely enticing, so those boundaries are probably going to be very, very challenged. Oversee and execute. Something large-scale and ongoing, something like in the military. A new means of applying intervention. Not the beam chamber, not the walkabout implant. Risk to Paratus Group's clientele and reputation for the implementation of a technology previously considered to be virtually risk-free? Wonderful. Give the contract to a competitor if Lawrence J. James is not involved? A threat and an ego stroke at the same time. Persuasive. Enough to offset the risks and concerns? Too soon to say. Upon whom precisely will this novel intervention be applied? Larry finally asked. I am limited in how much I can tell you based on my assessment of your level of interest, the Mr. Smith redirected. I think that's jumping ahead a bit. Oh, I'm interested, Larry admitted to the Mr. Smith and himself. The promotion alone is interesting. Paratus Group has never had anyone in leadership under 40. Plus, I definitely want to get my eyes, if not my hands, on this new application technology. Can you at least tell me about that? The Mr. Smith considered, then replied, Your interest piqued? I can. Before he could continue, however, the door opened and a short, blonde woman in a tight sweater, short skirt, and apparently athletic body entered the office, digital clipboard in hand, and introduced herself. I'm Dr. Ann Caro, clinical psychology consultant for the group's New York-based technicians. She extended her hand toward the Mr. Smith as he stood and took it, both grasping and shaking each other's hands gingerly. Larry spoke over the potential client's representative. He is calling himself Mr. Smith, but he's actually an anonymous representative of an anonymous client. And the director made this appointment? She asked, looking to Larry, releasing the other man's hand. Larry nodded, and she continued. Anonymity is a rare commodity around here. If I may call you Larry and Ann, then you can call me Daniel, the man offered, adding, and that is my actual God-fearing, lion-taming name that my mother gave me. Ann looked to Larry uncertain. Larry shrugged his shoulders in reply, saying, Hell, he already started calling me Larry. I've got nothing to lose. He was about to tell me about a new technology for applying intervention. If you want in, you might want to humor him. Okay, Daniel, she addressed him. Why have you come to us for intervention if you have a superior technology for it? Well, it's not superior or inferior, just different, he answered. We just lack a sufficient quantity of experienced technicians to make use of it. I'm here to contract the Paratus Group. And the director, Larry chimed in, said he's got to get through me. Ouch, she said to Daniel playfully, sitting in one of the armchairs and taking a drink from Larry's tumbler, still sitting on the table between them, announcing with dissatisfaction, Brandy? Weak brandy, Larry replied, although aiming a glare at Daniel before turning to Ann and explaining, I've been trying to lay off the sauce, the hard stuff anyway, for a while. She set the glass down in disgust, then lightened her affect for Daniel, asking, So, it's going to be a hard sell. You might want one, well, 2 of these for yourself before you continue. Daniel looked to Larry uncertainly. Larry spoke. Drink all you want, or don't. But if that look is about her, she's not optional. If VAD Lawrence J. James is going to be in charge of an intervention project, then Dr. Annalise Caro is going to be my top psych doc. The man in the black suit calling himself Daniel loosened his tie and sat back as comfortably as he could manage on the firm couch, offering, We found a way to broadcast intervention protocols. Ann's eyes narrowed angrily. Larry's mouth opened and closed as though he didn't know what to say, but definitely wanted to say something. Like in the clear? Ann asked. Unencrypted, yes, Daniel replied. A tiny receiver is required, but nothing so large as the walkabout implant. It doesn't even have to be implanted, not necessarily. We think we'll have it effectively microscopic in less than a year. I'm sorry, Larry blinked and began. I thought a government spook just came into my office and told me that he can dust a town with microscopic transmitters and delete the memories of everyone in it via satellite. Is that right there, Danny? I'm hardly, Daniel stopped himself and shifted focus. That's not the project. Nothing of the sort. This isn't the military, and I don't know of any efforts to weaponize intervention. Larry laughed. I do. Well, did anyway. You can bet your ass that as soon as anyone at the Octagon gets wind of this, that's exactly what they'll do with it. Just for starters, they got people wargaming new theoretical crimes against humanity every day. Who knows what they'll come up with when they get a hold on this? I'm not equipped to answer that question, Daniel admitted, nor am I authorized to speculate on it at this time. Such a line of inquiry was, in all honesty, unforeseen. Ann finished the brandy in the glass, poured another, finished it, poured again, and pushed it over to Daniel, adding, Freaks you right the hell out, though, right? Daniel took the drink and sipped in acknowledgement. How many people, this room, the team that developed it, all their consultants, all your bosses, Larry asked, know you can broadcast intervention? 143, Daniel answered, then corrected. 44, including Anne, apologies at our current count. We're in the process of confirming that. I assure you it's no more than 200, and I'm fairly certain it's quite a bit less. If I take the job, Larry continued, it will be in part to make sure that we limit this information. No one gets read in or hired on without my personal approval. I don't care how hard that becomes, that's not negotiable. I want to hire my own privacy and security consultant on the Paratus Group side, and I want final approval over whoever will be liaising security on your side. I think we can agree to that, Daniel slid in as Larry continued. That's just the beginning. I don't feel like saying no is an option at this point, and boy, oh boy, Danny boy, do I not like that. My demands will, thusly, be all the more demanding. So who the hell do you work for, anyway? The NICED, Daniel answered. You say that like I'm supposed to know who the NICED is, Larry barked. Daniel Smith answered. The New York State Education Department. Anne gasped. Jesus Christ!